Well, welcome back. Today we are jumping back into our timeline, but we're also going to be discussing giving in the church. In September of 2013, something huge happened in our community. A flood came through.
100-year flood down the Big Thompson.
Yep, it came through all across northern Colorado. It even got clear out to the east side of the state. And it was devastating. A lot of farmers lost crops. I mean, roads were demolished. We couldn't drive up the canyon to go to Estes for a year.
Both sides, both routes up there had severe water damage. Yeah, it was at least a year, if not longer. The last time a flood like this came through was 1976. It's funny that the one park that has all of the 1976 flood history information, if you would go to that park, you could read all about that big flood and see what was right in that spot in 1976 and how it changed. And now you can see what happened to it in 2013. The exact same area
it all got washed away. Yeah,
it's crazy. But we live in between the two rivers, one of those being the Big Thompson, and
we were right
in the middle
in the flood path. Yeah. So what happened was it had rained an absorbent amount. And so this happened up in the mountains where
the dam
they control the flow down, and so it came all the way down.
Yeah, the Estes Park Dam broke, that one up there.
There's our community and another town, and there's, I don't know, there may be like 1.5 miles, 2 miles apart from each other. We really function as one big community. Our town where we are in, we're a little higher up on a hill, whereas the town right next to us is lower in elevation. And
to give you perspective, think about railroad track crossings, because everybody has those in their community. And the level of those, the water in that community was at or above the crossing guards for the railroad track.
Yeah, like when the arm comes down,
the water,
the red and white.
Lots of feet of water.
Yes. And so there was people who lost everything, lost absolutely everything. And to lead up to that, for a couple of years, we had been having something called the giveaways. It started off where you could bring children's clothing, and it was basically like a children's clothing swap. You bring your kids' clothes, and you would bring them like a couple weeks before. We would sort through them all, put them into piles according to size, and then you would come back on the day of the giveaway, and then you could basically get free clothes in your kids' size. There was no exchanging of money. It was all free. It grew from there, and it grew wildly to where then we were offering clothing for all ages, men, women, children. We were having specific sections for baby items. So like pack and plays and bouncers and, strollers and things like that. And then we started giving away household items. So if you had like a picture on your wall you didn't like anymore, you just brought it to the giveaway. Board games, kids' toys, like you name it, we were giving it away. But the year of the flood, we started accepting furniture and appliances.
Yeah, it had grown from a kids' clothing swap with some moms to the chaos of like anything and everything that you could imagine. Oh my goodness. And then along comes a flood.
Yep. And so here comes the flood. We had already started collecting things for this giveaway. And this is one of the things that when you go back and you're like, I said this, you are so like, I hope everyone listening to this has secondhand embarrassment for me because I'm humiliated to know that I behaved this way. But I was thoroughly convinced, and I said out loud, I even said this on television, that I was so thankful that God had prepared us for this day. And God knew this was going to happen and that we were going to get to help all of these people because we already had all of this stuff. Looking back, like how tone deaf is that for people who lost everything, lost their entire homes, were destroyed by this flood. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad that I have this old couch that some lady who smoked in had cats owned that I can give you.
I think that
isn't God amazing?
I think that right there is really like the level of insanity that you're talking about, because I mean, it is on one hand awesome that God had prepared a collection of things for people who might need it. Like God does prepare and do things like that, and that's awesome. But like the fact that the behind the scenes though, like people were giving anything and everything. Like it took me years. I had stuff brought to my house because I had space to store it, that when it came time for the giveaway wasn't picked up because, oh, we can't take that. We can't. Well, these people dumped it off. I said I'd be a holding spot. So people were dumping stuff off at my house that wasn't worthy of giving away. And I had to buy dumpsters later and break it apart and throw it away. Like, cause that's the part that's like, yes, I'm so glad.
Okay.
I'm so glad that God dumped all this crap on my house so that the people in the flood could not take it.
So, okay. Cause you just said something I did not know. So I was leading the giveaways at this time. When it started off years ago and it was just the kids' clothing, it was the lady who she had the pantry in her garage, right? Well, we had established that she had gotten upset over some 3G stuff with Tom and she left the church. Yeah. When she left the church, it was actually leading up to a giveaway. I was the only one who had been a part of them since the beginning and helping volunteer and helping organize and helping sort. So I was asked if I could step in last minute to lead that year's giveaway. And I said, yep, absolutely. And then it just was like, well, Amanda's doing it. Amanda's doing it. I never wanted to do the giveaways, but it was always like, well, Amanda's doing it. So I had standards because this woman who started it had standards. And in the beginning, it was like, if you wouldn't put those clothes on your own kids, don't bring them here to give them to someone else. Don't bring your baby onesies that are stained with spit up or blowout stains or anything like that. Like if you wouldn't put them on your kids, then don't bring them here. And we would sort through things and we would throw away things that were warranted to be thrown away. If it was something that like we just needed to take them home and washed, like we had a team of women who would take clothes home and wash them and bring them back. But that year of the flood specifically, there was so much stuff that was coming in and we were throwing a lot of stuff away. And there was people specifically of the older boomer generation who did not like that I was throwing stuff away because I was being wasteful. And I said, well, no one's going to use this. And I had the mindset of, why are people donating their crap? Like, it's all crap. It's all junky crap. And God gives us his best. And if we're doing this to be a reflection of him in our community, why are we giving junky crap away? Shouldn't we be giving the best away? Like, why are we doing this? And so I would throw stuff away, and there was people who would particularly go out from the dumpster and dig it out. And I never knew what happened to all of that stuff. So you're telling me that all of that stuff ended up at your house?
Like, well, I mean, maybe, but I mean, people would show up. Okay, so like, just to give some context to like, the church has access to things like trailers and men who are willing to come and help and move things, and everybody's on board with this giveaway. So someone would call the church and say, hey, I have a couch I want to donate. And so the church would send out these worker men and their trailer to come and pick up a couch. They would bring that couch to my house and put it in my garage. They would bring boxes of stuff on trailers for the giveaway because I had an extra space, like I have an extra garage. You know, it's now converted, you know, but at the time it was a garage. So I have a second garage to my house, and they would like load it full of stuff for the giveaway. Then the people would come for the giveaway stuff and go in my garage and be like, well, I can't take that. You're not taking that. We're not taking that. We're not taking that. So now I was stuck with hutches and couches and boxes of junk that I had to dispose of.
Gotcha.
So was that stuff that somebody took out of the dumpster? I don't know where they got it from, but we were, before the giveaway, housing stuff because the church didn't have enough room to house all of this furniture and stuff. But then the day of like the morning or the night before the giveaway, the little worker men would come with the trailer, and whoever else would come and load up the stuff to take it around the corner to the church. But they didn't take it all because some of it was, like you said, it's like the people picking up so somebody calls the church and they say, I have a couch.
Yeah.
The men go to the house to pick up the couch. They don't go, I can't take that. Their job is to go get the couch. They don't question what it looks like. They don't question that it's been sitting on the curb and nobody's taken it for the free sign for 6 months. So it's been rained on, snowed on, it's broken in the middle, or it's super heavy because it's a sleeper couch, or, you know, like back in the day when couches were like 5,000 pounds. They don't say no to it. They bring it to my house. And we're like, okay, because we said we would house this stuff under the guise of it'll be leaving in a week. And then when the giveaway people show up and they're like, we can't take that couch. We're not giving that we're not putting it out there. God wouldn't give that to somebody. Now it's at my house. Who's going to get rid of it at my house? I did with dumpster after dumpster after dumpster that I spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on to clean out my garage and my back house that was loaded with stuff that was meant for the giveaway.
So me being the person in charge, I had no idea that you were storing stuff at your house.
It was announced on stage. Like, if anybody can help and store stuff, we volunteered our storage space for the giveaways.
I had no clue.
Isn't that crazy?
I had no clue.
Yeah. That was how we helped with the giveaway.
I'm so sorry.
We donated our house space, the space in our garages. That was how Froggy and I participated in the giveaway.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, well, okay, we're even. You didn't get paid for my wedding photos, and I had to pay for all those flipping dumpsters to get rid of donated crap that nobody really wanted because it was nasty.
Oh, God has a sense of humor, doesn't he?
I'm not mad. I'm sorry. I get a little worked up, but I'm not mad. It was a bane of my existence.
No, it was
because if you knew Froggy too, I mean, this is Froggy's elitism. I have the space. I'm helping. I have the space. You know, like, this is what God has called us to do. I mean, this is huge. It doesn't matter that we don't have a garage anymore. It doesn't matter that my second garage is loaded of boxes of stuff that's not mine. It doesn't matter that I had to spend hundreds of dollars in 2 dumpsters to get rid of it all. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
And the whole premise of like having places to store stuff was to put the larger furniture.
No, it made sense. It absolutely made sense.
Yeah. Because you shouldn't have had any boxes because we should have been sorting through all of those because we were sorting through stuff. And this, when I tell you people donated anything and everything, we sorted every day. Every single day, multiple hours a day. We had morning shift. We have a noon shift. We had an evening shift.
Didn't want in boxes and put it in the dumpster. Yeah, probably ended up in my garage.
That's why I'm thinking is like, if you had boxes of stuff, it's probably the stuff that we threw away.
I mean, boxes and bags and just a huge pile of stuff.
Yeah. Because you shouldn't have had any of that because we were sorting through stuff. And it was mostly the older ladies, the retired ladies. You would have some stay-at-home moms that would come in, and help sort. But there was a lot of older retired ladies. There was this old lady in particular. And I mean, she's probably in her, like, I don't know, mid to late 70s at this point in her life in 2013. And she opens a bag and it has lingerie in it.
Oh my gosh.
Lingerie that is very clearly, we took it off in a fit of passion and just put it in the bag. We didn't wash it. So I will let
it's awesome.
Your imagination just, so she goes, well, who would donate this? And she picks up this nightie and out falls how can I say this to meet network standards? A battery powered
toy
female item.
There you
go. She did not know what it was. We are in the gym in the church. It falls out, silence. And everyone is in shock. And she goes to pick it up. And I say, don't touch that, don't touch that. And she's like, what? What is it? And I said, just go wash your hands. I'll take care of it. Just go wash your hands. And I went and I had like a shirt in my hand. So I went and picked it up with the shirt and threw it in the trash can. Well, she goes and washes her hands. I follow her because like we just took the whole bag of nighties, everything, threw it in the trash can. You probably had that at your house in a box.
We're in a bag. I mean, there were bags too. So now I'm really convinced that I had the trash.
Yeah. Aren't you happy to know that? So I follow her in to wash my hands. And she is like, what was it? And I was like, it's fine. It doesn't matter. It was something that was inappropriate and definitely not something you donate. Yes, people lost everything. But there's just certain things you just need to go buy brand new and not get donated to you. And so she didn't know what it was.
Might have had higher church attendance if you put that stuff out.
So she goes around to everyone sorting and is asking what it was, and no one wants to tell her. So finally, she is mad, and she wants to know right then and there what it was. And she does not think it's fair that she touched it and doesn't know what it was. And by everyone's reaction, so being the person in charge, even though I was probably the youngest one in the room at that moment, I had to explain to this 75-year-old woman what that item was. She had never heard of one before. Man. She asked, why would someone use something like that?
Yeah.
We had a brief sex ed lesson. And then she's like, oh, well, that's even worse than what I thought it was. And I said, well, what did you think it was? And she goes, oh, one of those like drug paraphernalia things. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, I should have just lied to her and told her it was a bong. Like, that's what I should have done because she never would have known. And it would have been much less awkward.
This is like parenting 101. When your child says something inappropriate to you and you're in this situation, and instead of trying to explain it, the first thing you should always do is ask, what do you think it is?
You think it is?
I will never forget learning that lesson from a lady who her husband had a rooster tattooed on his ankle, and her 2-year-old was talking about it the way the dad would talk about it, and she didn't realize that the 2-year-old had picked up on that. And she goes, well, before I freaked out as to what my child was saying, I was like, what do you think that is? And then she soon was like, okay, he's just talking about his dad's tattoo. Like, that makes more sense because the context the kid was using it in. He was in the bath and he was saying inappropriate stuff. And so always a good lesson. Ask first. What do you think it is? And you can figure out where to go from there. That poor lady.
A toddler did not teach me that lesson.
Poor lady.
A woman older than my own grandmother taught me
that goodness lesson. Gracious, that's funny.
To which Charlotte found out about it after the fact because people were talking about it and thought it was funny that I had to explain to this older lady. Charlotte couldn't believe that I told her what it was. And I was like, she was upset. Like, she was mad. She was legit mad that no one was telling her. And when she's like, well, I touched it, I deserve to know what it is. I was like, well, like, you do.
Now is like looking back, like I see that happening in like the culture that breeds that.
Oh, the purity culture.
Like, somebody should have just told her right away. Like, why do we like that could be a whole nother episode. It's just that whole interaction.
Yeah. So no, because it made it so much more awkward.
You just tell the woman, like, serious, like, oh my gosh, you're not going to burn in hell for telling the lady. Like, that situation happened. Like, come on now. I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast episode. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're preparing for this giveaway. The flood happens, and our two towns are essentially cut off from one another. That railroad track that you were talking about, that the water was up to the
crossing guard,
the armed guards. That road is in between our two towns. And so it was, okay, this happened. This is a devastating thing for a community. We're saying we love the community. What are we going to do to help them? Like right now, right here in the moment. And people kept kind of like, well, we should do this. We should do this. And finally, Tom gets frustrated and says, fine, we're going to open up the church. Whoever needs to come, needs a place to stay. The church is open. Okay. Everyone who needs a place to stay because their house is underwater is on the other side of that road that they can't, like, this town next to us is essentially an island.
Yeah, that all of the roads that separate these two towns are flooded, and a lot of them are dirt roads.
Yeah. And this town essentially becomes an island. It is a small community. They do not have their own grocery store. They have a couple of gas stations. At the time, there's, I think, 2, maybe 3 restaurants in town. One of the restaurants actually ends up, they close and they take all of their food and everything and go to the middle school and they cook for the community. Yeah. And they're cooking and serving meals. Some people are donating money to help them out. Some people are, they just can't because they have nothing. And they are serving meals to people. They are being the hands and feet of Jesus in their community. And Tom's like, well, the way we're going to help is we'll just, if you need a place to stay, come to the church. So then I was like, okay, so if someone needs a place to stay, who's getting called? And Tom didn't want to come because he would have had to drive kind of a long way around to get to the church building, because where he lived, one of the roads was washed out. So he would have it would have taken him a long time to get to the church. So we went through all these people who could go and open the door. And so he called and asked me if I could open the door. My husband was stuck at work because when the flood started happening, he worked at a hospital. He had to go to the hospital to make sure the hospital didn't flood. And he's stuck at work for days. He's sleeping on a cot in his office. And I'm at home with 3 small children. And I'm like, I can't, I can go open the door. I can't stay there overnight with people. Like, I have my kids. And Tom was really frustrated with that. And so people were throwing out a bunch of ideas and asking Tom, can we do this? Should we do this? What if the church did this? And finally, Tom gets frustrated and he sends out a message, an email to, I think there was 4 or 5 of us on the email. And the gist of it basically was, I don't care what you do. I don't want to have anything to do with it. You guys figure it out yourselves. You figure out how you think the church should respond to this. So this pastor, who is supposed to be loving and
is all about the community, and our outreach,
and is all about the community, is annoyed within 6 hours.
Right. Well, and it's so interesting because, let's go back and dissect a lot of that, and just because the one town is way more devastated by this than the town that we live in. The town that we live in has a lot of higher spots. Really, there was only one low spot that really, it was one little strip because, and so much of the issue is that what people don't understand is that we come along as human beings and we move rivers and we make things man-made and we curate it and we landscape it, but Mother Nature doesn't care. That river belonged where it belonged, and the river went back to where the river belonged. And that's what caused a lot of the problem, is that we have moved a lot of the river to build and to put houses and businesses and things like that. The river's like, I don't care. That is my natural place, and that's where I'm going back to. And so, but for us in our town, we just we don't have as much low-lying land as the other town. Yeah. And that community was doing what it needed to do, being cut off. If you would have to go into that community to really help, and people in that community were doing that. And in our community, the thing that Tom offered is what the fire department was offering, because the fire department is so close to the church and on the same level of ground. That resource was available for them to help people get to resources. And
every school in our school district, so the ones in our town and the ones in the neighboring town, all were offering the same thing.
And that's the absurdity of, I'm going to do the same thing they're doing, but there's already somebody doing that. And the need within our community, if you separate the two communities, wasn't as great as the other community. Yeah. And so even the things that the community was offering as help within our community weren't being needed. And the fact that we just ignored, what is the real need and how can we address that? On a leadership level of well, we got to do something, so let's do this, which granted, not a bad idea. People in the community were offering that. We just didn't have as many people who needed that need, and that need was already being filled. So it's interesting to me, to really look at that.
So in this, it ended up the people that Tom sent that email to, we all decided we were going to meet at the church office and we were going to discuss what can we actually do to help. We want to help, but like you said, we're cut off. The help that's really needed right now, there's no physical way for us to go and get there. You have National Guard is out here, so they're not even letting people.
Well, yeah, you had the National Guard, the Red Cross. They weren't letting people through.
Yeah. And so we couldn't help in the ways that were needed. So it was okay, what can we do? And through this conversation, it came up, keep in mind, this is in September of 2013. In May of 2013, so just a few months earlier, a giant tornado went through the community of Moore, Oklahoma. And there was someone in our church that had family out there, or
somebody in our church worked for a company.
There we go. That's what it was.
Somebody in our church worked for a company that did disaster stuff. Like they worked for a company that went into disasters, and that was their job, was to help repair, replace, help in time of need type of thing.
Yes. So this person got a whole bunch of other people. It started off that this person's company was looking for donations of like bottled water and stuff that they could take. The company left and took those donations, but people still wanted to give. And so this person and a couple other ladies, they decide they're going to take it upon themselves and they're going to continue to collect donations. They rent like a U-Haul style truck, load the whole back of it up with, water, clothing, all of this type of stuff. And they drive down and basically take like a girls' trip down to Oklahoma, and they're going to go deliver this stuff. This company worked with the Red Cross. And so when the company left to take donations, they are sanctioned with the Red Cross to work with them. These ladies show up with a truck full of stuff, and the Red Cross is like, we don't accept donations like in the moment. Like we're trying to actually like do stuff here. Like we don't have time to look at, like, I'm sorry, we can't accept this right now. So, which is something that no one knew, that the Red Cross doesn't just accept donations
on the spot. Like you can't just drive to the Red Cross and be like, I have this truck full of stuff. And they're like, we don't take donations in the middle of disaster care. There's a process for that.
Yeah, we're a little busy right now.
Which also, like, nobody in the church knew.
Yeah, no one knew in the moment. So I guess they drove around for a couple days, and they finally found a church who would be willing to take it. And so they unloaded everything at the church. So when we were having this meeting about our flood, that was one of the things that came up was, well, this is what really happened when those ladies went down to Oklahoma. Maybe that's what we need to be, because people don't know that the Red Cross can't accept these donations in the moment. And so people are going to start showing up. Maybe that's what we need to do, is we need to be a place where if you can't, like, we're accepting donations.
Right. Well, which is so interesting, because the true story of what happened with those ladies taking the stuff to Oklahoma, that part of the story was never told in public at the church. Like everybody assumes, I mean, like, or at least for me, I'm not gonna say everybody, I'm sorry, let me not speak for everybody. My participation in the church, that was not information that I was privy to. Like, I thought they took it and it went to where it was supposed to go. They came back and everything was great. That was like how did it go? It was wonderful. We got our stuff to, the story that was told, the narrative that was told about that on their return trip was never the truth of what actually happened. But it makes sense as to how this story unfolds, that's where the idea that the way we could help was to be a donation center. That makes total sense, because that's what we became. Like, that's what we became.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
To the point where it was Thursday night, I'm with children's ministry in the youth group, and someone is driving around and finds our church is open and stops in. They're like, someone is here they want to know if we're accepting donations. So someone comes and gets me out of the classroom. I go out, and it's this church from Wyoming. They were clear up by like Jackson. They were in like a community up near like that area of Wyoming. They had heard about the flood. They loaded up a whole bunch of stuff and put it in this trailer, drove all the way down here to come and help our community, and showed up. And again, the Red Cross was like,
exactly what our church did. Like, they did, their church came down to us.
Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I have the children from children's ministry and the kids from youth group, and we go out and we unload this trailer. And I mean, these people they really, and it was all like, it was not like janky donated stuff. Like, they went and they bought like a pallet of green beans and a pallet of corn.
Right. And they had like
and a
toilet
pallet
paper
of
and toiletries, right? And
like, feminine
very
items.
Thoughtful.
Yes, very thoughtful in what they brought. It wasn't just like everyone from the church unloaded the janky crap from their closets and threw it in a trailer and brought it down. It was actually very well thought out what they brought. And so we unload all of it, and then it was decided, well, we have all this stuff, so we're going to put together food bags. So then everyone who comes to the giveaway to get free stuff also gets a free bag of food. So then we had to start doing that.
Well, yeah, and we loaded so all the stuff went into our pantry that we already had. And then that way people who were affected by the flood, like, we really kind of pushed that mentality of like, we are the donation centers. If you need stuff, you don't need to go very far. Just come to our pantry and pick out your 3 items.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what it was. So the day of the giveaway comes. Somehow the news had found out that we were doing this giveaway, and because now who's the person in Tom and Charlotte are nowhere to be found at the giveaways. But now we're
at the fall giveaway. So we had the spring giveaway in May. They took the stuff to Oklahoma. September, the flood happens. And now we're back to, this is the giveaway right after the flood, and it's a fall giveaway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like within a couple weeks. And so Tom and Charlotte had never shown up to giveaways. They did not like being there. They didn't, because typically when people come and they're in need, they want to talk to a pastor. That annoyed Tom. When it comes down to it, Tom didn't want to have to talk to people about their feelings and, what they were going through, and actually pastor. So he stayed home for the giveaways. And so the news comes and they want to talk to someone. There's no pastor there to talk to anyone. So guess who they get directed to?
You.
Me. And I stand on television and just, I am so thankful that God did this, and look how amazing God is, and all of these things. And just the absolute tone deafness of like, I had no, like, my heart goes out to the people who lost their homes, who lost all their stuff. It was all like, look what God is using me to do. And look what God is doing through our church. Our church is so amazing. And look what God did.
Look at us. Look at us.
So
the level of elitism, though, like we talked about, the toxic church culture traits, and, elitism is the one where it's like, what are you like really helping for? And what, like, just that whole, it all seems like a good idea, but it's just dripping in these toxic
characters. And it's really easy for a woman whose house, is on the high part of town, and, my roof barely got wet in the rainstorm. It's really easy for me to stand there and talk about how good God is when I didn't lose anything.
And it didn't cost you anything to serve, but some time. So
Exactly. So I kind of want to use that as a jumping off point with a conversation about giving practices in the evangelical church, because we talk about giving in forms of donation. That could be your time, that could be your stuff, or that could be your money. And so what does this look like? And how do we get this, like you said, elitism, like almost like the savior complex, that we're going to jump in and save the day, but are we really helping people, or do we just want to stand up and say,
look at me,
we're helping?
Look at me, look what I did,
look at the good
and
thing I
slap
did.
God on it. And I think that's a very valid point. And there's like just the whole topic of that's giving is a big topic in the church and in church circles and in church organizations. And like we talk about preying upon like people who are in destabilizing situations. And I feel like just church in general, the narrative is for the lost and the broken, right? Like the whole narrative is for the lost and the broken. That's destabilizing situations right there. And then we create this dependency. And that's where I feel like this giving tone starts in this give and take relationship that people have with the church, because you're expected to give not just a tithe, but an offering. You're expected to give your time, your talent, and your treasure, and not necessarily to God. I mean, it's all wrapped up in you're giving it to God, but I want to clear that away and be just very clear. Like you're expected to give that to the church, and in return, this church becomes the thing that you're dependent on. And so you have this cyclistic system of like you give to the church is giving to you. We want to slap some verses from Acts on there and say that they came together and they gave to one another, right? So that none would be too rich and none would be too poor. And it's all wrapped up in this pretty little bow. But the problem is that there's such an imbalance that happens with giving where when you get into toxic situations, the people that are giving, because they're in most of the time, like impoverished or destabilized situations, they're expected to give even if they can't. Because then we have verses of like the woman in the Bible who gave her last mite, and this is all this manipulation to give. And then I've been directly in situations where the church, not come as you are, just to be clear, where a church said, we can't give to you because you don't tithe enough. And you see this in a lot of high control religions where they are monitoring your tithing and giving. And then you get, based on what you've given to the church, you can receive back. Yeah. And it's just it's a slippery slope into how something that should be seemingly harmless can become very toxic and very destructive. And there are some situations that we experienced, both of us, on different sides of this at Come As You Are. And I think maybe we should just touch on some of those.
Yeah. So Tom, we've mentioned before, Tom is very, he did not like it when he felt like the church was after nothing but his money. So he likes to preach from the pulpit that the church will never ask for your money. We don't need your money. Like, you should give it because you want to give it and all of this kind of stuff. But
that's our seeker-friendly message, is that we don't want anybody who is unchurched or anybody who's come into the church for the first time to feel like we're asking for their money.
But behind the scenes, he was definitely concerned about who was tithing and what they were tithing. There was a point in time where, my husband, I was staying home. My husband was working. We were doing our best to make things work. We were barely paying the bills. And we were eating, I was feeding my family of 5, and I would be so excited if I could walk out of the grocery store for 2 weeks worth of groceries for under $100. And I would be so impressed with myself. Like I was clipping coupons. I was doing all the things that I could do to make it work, but we were still tithing our 10%. And there was a point in time where something needed bought or paid for or something. And Tom was looking at the tithe reports, and he called me into his office and he sat me down and he wanted to know why we weren't tithing 10%. And I said, we are tithing 10%. And I get this long lecture about how tithing is, a sign of your faith. And if you're not tithing your 10%, then where's your faith? And all of these things. And I said, again, we're tithing our 10%. And he looked at me and he goes, you mean to tell me your husband is only making this much money? Because he did the math of how much my husband was making at the time.
And was for that to be your 10%. Yeah.
Yeah. And I looked at him and I said, yes, that's what I'm telling you. That's what my husband makes. Which, FYI, what the church was paying Tom was more than what my family of 5 was making. And Tom was receiving retirement.
Yeah, he had extra income outside of the church income. That was retirement. Yeah. Yep. Which, to my understanding, is more than most people in that church make. So,
yes, 100%.
But can't understand why everybody else is struggling.
He got so upset and he's like, that's all you're making? That's all he makes? And I'm like, yeah. And he never apologized for it. He was just like, okay, well then you can go, I guess.
Yeah.
And there was another instance.
And this is why, this is why before I married Froggy and now again, I tithe in cash. Mm-hmm. I honestly, I don't need the tax write-off, and no, absolutely not. I will never allow a pastor to be able to look at a tithe report and make a decision on anything. I think it's a problem. Anyway, that's just my stance. That's my protesterness. Go ahead.
Well, a few years later, down the road, I am a part of Brandy and I are leading children's ministry together. And there is a gentleman who's serving in children's ministry, and they're looking at, leadership roles for certain things and everything. So again, Tom is looking at the tithe report because, if you're going to stand up and you're going to say you're a leader, then you need to be showing that you're tithing. So he calls me into his office and sits me down and he goes, can you explain this? And he has a stack of papers in his hands. And I was like, what is that? And he throws the papers in my face and says, explain to me why this is what he's giving. And I was like, this guy who I guess I'm getting yelled at because he's serving in children's ministry. And so Brandy and I are leading children's ministry. So we're getting yelled at for what this guy is tithing. And if he is or isn't tithing his 10%. And I'm like, I don't know. Go ask him. Why are you yelling? Go ask him.
I'm not his financial advisor. I don't know.
I'm not his financial advisor. I'm not his wife. I have no skin in this dude's game. Why are you yelling at me over it? And so he didn't get the answer he wanted from me. So then I guess he called Brandy in and did the same thing to her and yelled at her, not only for this guy, but then for other people. And she kind of gave him the same answer. I don't go ask them. But this is what it came down to. It was easier for him to yell at us about their tithing because he didn't want them to know that he was monitoring what they were tithing.
Because that was a big thing. That was a big part of the narrative, was that it wasn't, because I had brought that up too, because one of the churches that I went to before that one, that was a big thing. Before the church could help you, they had to review how much you were giving to the church. And that put me off. And so I was very verbal about that. And before I married Froggy, because I was questioned, why don't you tithe? I do. Go look at your cash report. A good percentage of that is my tithe. because I'm not going to do that. And so that was a big one of those things, like I talked about when I was like, do I sign the church membership? Well, if you want to marry me, you have to, right? Well, if you want to be married to me, you got to tithe, and it has to be recordable. Like, my dad has to know you're tithing. Like, okay. You know,
like, it almost was like, should you have taken your cash and waved it so he could see you
put
from
my name on
stage and watch,
you know, and if you're gonna tithe in cash, put your name on the envelope. No, and then of course you get like the whole tax thing, and my viewpoint on that is I'm back to the same viewpoint of like, I'm sorry, give unto Caesar what is Caesar, and give unto God what is God. Like, I give to God, and you know, I give to Caesar, so I don't need the tax benefit. Thanks, I'm good. You know, like, yeah, I don't know. It's just tithing is one of those things, and you know, and there's nothing wrong with tithing. You know, I'm not, whatever, you know, your viewpoint, have your viewpoint on tithing either way. But it's a problem when that's like in that system of high control religion of like your value and your worth is based on your giving and your tithing. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's not biblically church. It's just not. Gosh, that puts us right into like some of the practices that churches have, and especially at Come As You Are, that I would say are a little shady. And things that I experienced, and you've probably experienced too, things that made you go, but at the time, because of all the Kool-Aid you were guzzling, it wasn't really clear, and you're like, your spidey senses told you something was wrong with that, but like, you didn't do anything about it, and you didn't quite fully grasp that there really was something wrong with it. We've both had some of those experiences at Come As You Are.
So this again is another perfect example of why we're doing the type of podcast that we're doing, because there is a ton of evidence out there. You could look at, like, you know, why does, you know, Joel Osteen's church meet in, you know, a former NFL
stadium? Yeah.
Stadium, you know, how do they have money to pay for that? You know, you have these pastors with jets and all of this stuff. Like, why do they have the money to pay for all of these things?
Because being a pastor is a very lucrative business.
You know, if you've been on social media for the last couple of years, you know, around Christmas and Easter time, you know, there's this movement of like, tax the church. Like, if your church can have, you know, drummer boys suspended from the ceiling fly in as you sing Little Drummer Boy at your Christmas service, or, you know, the angel can drop down from the heavens in your nativity story, or Jesus can rise from the dead,
like literally
in your Easter service. Yeah. It takes a lot of money to make that stuff happen. And so when you have this like Broadway level production from a church that's not paying taxes, because so the tax benefits, churches are non-exempt or tax exempt. So it's considered a 501c3, which is a nonprofit organization. They're exempt from paying federal income and unemployment taxes. They get tax deductible contributions for patrons who donate to them. Like you mentioned, like you can claim what you gave towards the church for your tithe. It says possible exemptions from state income, sales, and employment taxes in Colorado. That is a thing, because whenever we would go and have to buy something using the church money, we would have to take the little tax exempt certificate thingy with us. They pay reduced postal rates. They have tax exempt financing, and they're eligible to receive certain grants and public funding. So like with COVID, you know, nonprofits were able to apply for specific funding for things. And so you have this like, well, if the churches aren't paying taxes, they have so much money that they're able to do these things. So you have all these huge churches, right? Well, again, it's another example of, well, that's a mega church. How many small churches around the country are doing what Come As You Are did? Because we never did anything big and extravagant, At this point in time. We did a play one year and that got a little out of control, but that's another story for another day. But we weren't doing anything huge or extravagant, but yet there were things being done with the money. Like you said, we've had these experiences, and it just leaves you to question what was going on with that, and where's the accountability in it? When you have this evangelical structure where really it's one person, and even if you have a board,
I feel like
how do you have that oversight?
Like it come as you are, specifically when you have this single person in charge and they are the church, because that's what I've come to realize is that, come as you are church was really Pastor Tom church. And so I would question, and I there's things that's not, I don't know. There's things that lead you to question. It makes you raise an eyebrow of what of these tax benefits were being reaped, directly by the pastor as opposed to the organization. I do feel like church organizations across the board are taking advantage of these tax benefits that they get. We talked about that was the biggest motivator in church history for the moral majority. They were upset that they couldn't have their segregation academies or lose their tax status. Having that tax status is so important that, so much of this stuff was launched as an attack on the government and being, or anybody can have a church. And you even see it in Hollywood, there's been so much that's come out of these Hollywood celebrities that have churches solely for the tax exempt benefit. It's a big deal. It's a big deal at a mega church, and it's a big deal at a mini church. And I did see something I just would have put in here that I think was absolutely hilarious. I was telling you earlier about this guy I saw on TikTok who wanted to solve the homeless problem by only allowing people to sleep on the streets or in tents for it to be legal within 500 feet of a church. And I might even be on board with that. I think that's absolutely ingenious. And if the churches don't allow it, they lose their tax exempt status. Because isn't that supposed to be one of the methodologies of church, is that we are here to support the homeless? And I just think,
you're not getting taxed because you're taking that money and you're pouring it into the community to help the community.
So I thought it was ingenious, and he ended his TikTok with, how quickly would homelessness be solved if we just dumped it in the front steps of the church? And I was like, I might just get on board with that. I like that. But this lack of accountability, just to get back on track here for a second, this lack of accountability. And I'm just going to bring to question what pastors are using their tax exempt status for personally. I'm just going to bring that into question, but dive into some of the things that we specifically saw as far as giving goes, because this isn't an episode about tax in church. Mm-hmm. It's about giving. I know for me, I was involved with the ministry, and the woman and I that were in charge of this ministry, and this was actually our pantry ministry. Her and I were working on the pantry ministry, and it was set up in a way that it was a separate little area, and it also needed its own little office because it was trying to run in conjunction with the front office of the church, but it was becoming too many people within this one small area of the front office. And so this ministry was big enough that it needed its own space. It needed its own desk. It needed its own office. It needed a place for people who were coming in to be interviewed and talked to, because we didn't just want to be here's some food, bye, see ya. We really wanted to get to know people. The heart of the ministry was to get involved and walk alongside of people. And it's another episode that turned into something crazy. Anyway, that's just every good idea turns into something. But this ministry needed a computer out in the area where it was functioning. If it was going to operate, it needed its own computer. And the lady and I went to Pastor Tom to see if there was money in the budget for this ministry to purchase this ministry a laptop computer so that it didn't stay out in that office area, which was cold, or if we needed to move inside, like we didn't want a desktop. We really wanted it to be movable. So was there...
Which, hold on, pause right there. Okay, so you said that was in the budget. We came to a realization, because we kind of had like a little back and forth of like, no, it wasn't. Yes, it was. So we came to a realization because you actually were one of the founding people who had started this ministry as an actual ministry.
Yeah, so right after I started going to the church at some point, this lady who actually was one of the ladies when I talked about my house being boarded up, this is one of the ladies that came to my house. And so part of my like relationship building within the church was a relationship with this lady, and who was very instrumental in helping me through that dark time. But also we continued to work together. And honestly, I don't remember if I like the ministry happened before that or after that, or if I knew her first, and like, but it's doesn't, I tried for so long to try to piece these things together because I want to be, honest and transparent. But also I was like, does that timeline necessarily matter? No. I boarded myself in my house. This lady was one of the ladies that came to the house. I had a relationship with this lady for years to come. And one of the things that we had done together was, because you had mentioned that they had a family ministry set up, and the lady had run it out of her house. And then she had left the church. And this lady and I came in and we rebranded that ministry. And it was during a time at the church where the church was really big again on mission, vision. And we had a couple in the church that was spearheading. Every ministry needed to be like revamped and made sure that they had a mission statement. They had a vision statement. They were following the 5 purposes of the church. And if they didn't, they had to go in and get those things. Like we weren't just doing anything. We weren't just doing ministries for the sake of doing ministries. They had to follow the mission and vision of the church, and they had to have their own mission and vision within that and within the 5 principles that the church followed. And so this lady and I together, we rebranded this ministry. We worked with leaders in the church to have a mission and a vision statement. We got it on to the annual budget, this ministry. I do believe that like people gave to it, but or maybe, because when you do a budget, you're saying this is the amount of money that the church is going to need to have available for this ministry to function, right? Okay.
Yes.
So in this case, it could be that in the annual budget, they said this ministry, if nobody gives to it, the church would need to come up with $3,000 to run this ministry annually. So whether or not, now looking back, whether or not that money actually existed, that there was $3,000 in the budget physically, or in the metaphorical budget of like, this is what the church should have for this.
Or they're expecting people to give $3,000.
Right. Like, however, because I feel like I've been through enough church budgeting meetings over the years that my understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, and because maybe different churches do different things. This is my experience in church budgeting meetings. And I mean, in some businesses too, where you go, we're going to project what we think it will cost to run our business in the next year. So the church is like, hey, what is it that the church does? How much money do we need to have? And that doesn't mean that on January 1st, that money's available for the entire year. It just means that as money comes in, it gets designated into the budget funds, because we anticipate that this church is going to bring in $100 this year. We have to designate where that $100 is going to go. So we put $5 over here and $3 over here and $2 over here. And we've now made a budget very similar to how you would annualize your home budget, right?
Yeah.
So whether or not that money actually existed or not, the church had budgeted like $3,000 for this ministry. And to the point that not just me, but the other lady, so her and I fully 100% believed that $3,000 was there to be spent in the church budget on this ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went and asked Pastor Tom for a laptop computer. Hey, how much money do we have available? Because some stuff had been bought. Like at this point, this ministry was active and things were being done, and we were putting things together and buying things and stocking shelves and using funds, right?
Yeah.
So we went to see how much money we had available in our budget to buy a laptop computer. And Pastor Tom was like, well, what do you need to buy a laptop computer for? And so we told him, and he was like, okay, well, the church has an old laptop. Before we go out and buy a brand new one, would you like to see if this laptop that nobody's using, that the church already owns, would work for what you need it to? And then if it doesn't, we'll just see about buying a new one. But rather than buy something new, let's just use what we already have. I think that laptop lasted less than a month, like maybe 3 weeks into using it. And there was a reason why the other ministry, which it might have even been children's ministry, to be honest with you. I think I always ended up with old children's ministry laptops in all of my years at the church. But computers and technology, they were at that point too, they were becoming so outdated so quick, and operating systems were changing and things were just no longer compatible. That the laptop lasted about 3 weeks. And then we found out very quickly that we could not use it. And when we went back to be like, okay, so this laptop doesn't work, we're going to need to buy one.
Like it's dead.
Yeah, it's dead. We didn't have any money in our budget, but we had money in our budget 3 weeks ago when we wanted to buy, you've got enough money to buy a new laptop, but do you really want to use that money for that? Like, okay, well, what? So essentially,
where'd that money go?
Essentially, the way it was explained was that we bought that crappy ass laptop from the church for the money in our budget, and that money went towards something else. It bought a laptop. It just bought a new laptop for the worship team.
And Tom decided that.
Yeah, because we were going to buy a laptop with our money out of our budget. Tom took the money from our budget and bought a laptop for the church, since we took the old laptop from the church.
Nice. So that's so funny that you bring up the budgeting, because down the road, I end up getting put in the position where I am leading that ministry. I left right after that. Not because of that. Yeah.
But that was like the first thing that started happening that for me, I was like, yeah, this was fun, but peace out. Like, I don't like what's going on. I see what's coming down the line, and I'm not that invested. So bye.
Yeah. So that lady you were doing the ministry with, she stayed on for a little bit. She was actually butting heads with an older lady who had joined the ministry. And so since I was doing the giveaways, I got voluntold that I needed to go in and kind of keep the peace between these two women. And eventually the woman that you were doing the ministry with, she left also. So then it left me in charge of it. And by the time I'm in charge of it, it is not a budgeted item for the church. I would go in to get monthly reports, and I would be given a report of, Sally, Tommy, and Joe, each of them gave $100 this month to go towards the pantry. And you had to specifically, when you gave money, you had to specifically say, I want it to go towards the pantry. And so you had $300 come in this month. That's all you have. It was not part of the church budget. It was not money that was set aside by the church. It was only if someone gave and specifically wrote pantry on there, then that's the only money that you were allowed to use.
Which makes sense, especially after that ordeal. Like that was a big oops. I got busted. Tom fully believed that computer was going to work and that he could get a new computer to use up on stage while playing the guitar, like for the worship team. Like, that was weird. It was very weird.
Well, that was a very common practice for Tom, is putting the worship team above other ministries. Not just in scheduling the church and scheduling, when things were allowed to happen in the church, but also like if you ever wanted to use the stage for any reason, we were never allowed to touch any worship ministry, anything. And then later on down the road, there was a couple and they were doing like park events, but it was very like low key. And it was meant, like, they went to a bunch of different parks in the community, and it was meant to be like, do you live near this park? Well, come and like do this fun event with your neighbors and get to know your neighbors. And then, a few weeks later, they would go to a different park and be like, do you live around this one? Well, come get to know your neighbors, kind of thing. And they had people that were giving money towards that. And so
because they were feeding people, right? They were doing like dinner in the park, come and hang out.
Yeah. They had like games. They had,
community event in little neighborhoods. I mean, it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. They were giving away like ice cream and popsicles and like they were doing a whole bunch of fun stuff. And so, people were giving money specifically towards that. And again, it's not something that was budgeted. You had to write specifically, I want it to go towards this. At some point after I had left the pantry ministry, it got changed to where it was all lumped together as one big family ministry. And so anything that had to do with, you needed someone to pay your bills, we had a family who, we had a family in our church that the mom suddenly passed away in a car accident. So helping the kids be able to have like Christmas presents that year, like all those types of things. Those were all things that came out of this family ministry. Anything that you did that specifically affected a family, then it came out of this. And it wasn't, I don't know if that was budgeted or if it was still just you had to designate money towards the family ministry.
Right, and it was just a fund that the church would manage for things that if it was needed.
Yeah. Yes. And so
I don't know that it was a budget item, but it was a known fund that we knew that the church would take in money and then designate it to where it was needed.
Yeah. And people who had a heart for that type of stuff would give and specifically say, I'm giving to the family ministry. So I do know that like the older lady who took over the pantry from me, she would get very frustrated because she thought it was still all pantry money. And it was being used for other things. So if someone came in and said, I need gas, and, you'd take them down to the gas station down the road and put $20 of gas in their car, that would come out of that fund. And so she was getting frustrated because she didn't know how much money she had at any given moment. And she had no say in what was being spent.
Right, but was always told, well, when you need something, if there's money there, you'll get it. Like, don't worry about it now, but when you are in the now and you need it, it'll be there, like, because money's coming in.
Well, and she was trying really hard. So, like, let's say, like, in January, she goes in and she's like, oh, there's $200. Okay, I only spent $100 to stock the shelves this month. So I should have another $100. Yeah. So that when I go in February, all of a sudden, oh, no, now you have $20. Well, what happened to that other $80.
Right, because it should have been designated like somebody gave $200 to the pantry and then she only spent $100 of that dollars. Rightfully, she should assume there's another $100. But the church wasn't marking it pantry. They were marking it, this is our general family fund. And so you snooze, you lose. You don't spend it, you lose it. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So when this couple that was doing the park stuff, once summer was over and it started to get colder, so they were doing things inside, and they decided, you know what, we're going to do like these nice family dinners, invite people to come, people who are lonely, who don't have anyone to, sit down and have a family dinner with. We're going to start doing nice family dinners. The church had a big commercial kitchen that they could use. And, they were going to do these really nice these nice dinners. And they wanted to go and buy some nice plates. Not like the paper plates. They wanted nice plates. They found cheap ones that were like, I think it was like $1.20 a plate at Walmart, and just like cheap, plain white plates, but something they could put in the dishwasher and use over and over again. And so they wanted to go buy these plates. And when they said, this is what we want to do, yep, go for it. You have this much money, whatever. Well, then as they're going and they're buying stuff, they get a frantic phone call from the woman, the finance lady in the office, and is like, stop. Whatever you're doing, you need to stop. You're spending too much, because she had seen on the online banking that they were spending this money, and they were having to go from Walmart to Walmart because, some would only have 5 plates. Some would, so she's like, you have to stop. So they came in and they're like, what is going on? Like, what happened? And pretty much they had someone come to them and say, I love what you're doing with this event, with this ministry. I love the idea. I'm giving you X amount of money. I don't know how much that was. Just for funsies, we're just going to say like a round number, like $500, whatever it was. Like, I'm going to give you $500. So they thought, and they specifically said it is for this event. So they thought they had $500 to spend. They go and they're spending, they're keeping track of what they're spending. The lady in the office is like, whoa, stop. Come back to the office. You need to turn the card in. You're done spending. They have a conversation, and it's basically like, well, you never had $500. Well, yeah, we did. This person told us that they gave it to, like, and yes, that person gave that money to the church. Like, we could verify that. So what happened to them? Well, it went into the family fund, and, we can't tell you what happened with it. And when someone gives money to the church, they should give freely and know that God can use that money however God wants to. Even if they say it has to be used for this, that's selfish giving. And you should only give. You mean
Tom can use that money however Tom wants to?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Tom gets to decide how God wants to spend the money at Come As You Are. So these people got rightfully so, got really upset and questioned a bunch of stuff. And that kind of led to a big mass exodus from the church at that point in time. But I will tell you that at the same time that we don't know what happened to that money that was given. We went to Georgia. The office staff all went to Georgia for a training. And the worship team got a new in-ear system.
I got a wonderful in-ear piece. Thank you.
I can't tell you if that is where that money went, but I can tell you that Georgia trip, I initially wanted to go to that training, and I was prepared to pay for it myself. I went in and asked for time off to go to that training. It turned into this whole big ordeal that there was like 6 of us that ended up going, Tom and Charlotte included. And when it was all said and done, none of us paid for anything.
I went on a trip.
We were in Georgia.
Very similar, and the same thing. I was expected to pay, and then all of a sudden I didn't have to. It was in the discretionary fund.
Yes, the discretionary fund.
Really quick, just being on the worship team and getting that fancy in-ear piece that we needed to fix our sound issues. I mean, really, It is interesting to me how magically the worship fund budget, the worship team had an amazing budget. A really amazing budget. Like, and anytime.
But on paper, they didn't.
I know. I know, but it was awesome because anytime that the worship team needed anything, we got it. Hands down, 100%. And those in-ear pieces and that whole system to fix our sound, because it was so horrible, it was only going to be fixed by eliminating the monitors and going to an in-ear system and all of that showed up. So that's interesting. It's just interesting to me because it was in the worship team budget. That's what I was told. It was in the worship team budget. The worship team had it in their budget.
So our listener could listen to this and be like, okay, like, don't nonprofits have to disclose their budgets and disclose their spending? Yes, they do. They don't have to give a line by line. Well, they have to give a line by line. The way Come As You Are got around that was at the annual meeting every January. They would put up on a screen the budget. This is what the budget was for this year. This is how we, it ended for last year. And then this is our budget for this coming year. It was very generic.
Yeah, but like I said, I sat in those budget meetings and it was, this is how much money the church brings in annually. This is what we've budgeted in the past for this ministry. Should we keep it, lower it, raise it? This is what we've budgeted for this. This is what we've budgeted for that. Is there anything new coming up? Do we need to have a budget for it? And on the surface, that all looks very legit. Like it really looks legit. And you're trusting these people that are in charge, that they know better than you know, and that they're doing things. But when these little discrepancies, when they come up and you're like, how did the budget really work? And I've said before, like, there was this magic way, this spiritual way. I'm not going to say magic, this spiritual way that the budget worked, that God always made sure there was money in the fund that needed it at the time. So when really it was just a hodgepodge of money coming together, and we really did just designate it wherever it was needed, but we only had a problem when two ministries needed the same money at the same time.
Yeah. Well, just like with the big giant summer park event that the church did every summer, it was only budgeted like something like $4,000 for that, and it cost over $10,000 every year because they had just anticipated that extra money to cover that deficit would all come in donations.
Right. And that right there, right where we started with, Tom would stand on stage and say, I don't want your money. I don't need your money. The church doesn't want your money. The church doesn't need your money. That was the seeker-friendly, unchurched message. Once you were in and you were a member and you were participating, you were expected to give everything to the church and fund everything. If you wanted to participate in a ministry, if God called you to it, he should be calling you to fund it.
Yeah. And so they would put these budgets up on the screen and you would just see this generic thing. So then it was like, if you have any questions or if you want to go over this, like, in more detail, contact the finance lady. And there would be people who would contact the finance lady and be like, your math wasn't mathing. So like, I just have some questions. And before they would be able to sit down and meet with the finance lady, they had to sit down with Tom. And they would get a lecture about why do you care? And it's God's money and all of this stuff. And to my knowledge, I never know a single person who ever actually got to sit down with the finance lady and go over things line by line. Because
you'd always talk some circular reasoning as to like, yes, it's a budget, just like your budget. Sometimes it doesn't come through. So we know some of our ministries might be short if giving's low, but sometimes giving is higher and then we have more than this and God works it out. At the end of the day, are you questioning God? Because God works it out.
Yeah. And if you really looked at it, like nothing made sense. And it all came down to what Tom felt was important at that time. When we get to the point in our timeline where we talk about the play, Brandy is going to share some incredible insight about how Tom, because that was important to him at the time, what she was allowed to spend on that. Meanwhile, you look at these things. There was one year where we did an Easter egg hunt and a big Easter event at the church, an outreach event, and I paid for the entire thing out of my own pocket.
Well, you and
I personally paid thousands of dollars to
you
make
and
that
so
happen.
many other people who would go and buy things, and you're paying tax. Like, it's completely mind-boggling to me that like only certain members of the church were allowed to use the Sam's Club card or allowed to use the church's tax exempt to buy things for the church and then reimburse the church. Why wasn't everybody allowed to do that? Like, if I'm the lady and I'm in charge of the coffee ministry of the church, I feel like the church on its tax-free, tax-exempt status should be buying the coffee, the plates, like all of the supplies should be bought through the church and its tax exemptness. And then if I want to do and give to that, or if even like, here, I'll give the church $100, now give me the church card so I can go use the tax exempt status. Because I know there's people that were allowed to do that in the church. But why isn't why do you have a single mom, or a lady on a fixed income reaching into their already limited budget and funding, struggling in their life to buy napkins for a church ministry when the church is quite capable of doing that? That's where I get beyond with this giving thing. I'm like, that's when we have a problem. Well, that and everything else that we've talked about.
Yeah. And honestly, like, that's one of the things, like, when we first started attending the church that we currently attend, and, we had that meeting with the pastor and I asked a bunch of questions, a lot of them revolved around giving. Do you have access to the giving reports? How often do you view them? Do you know who tithes and who is tithing at 10%? Do you even know what 10% for your biggest tithers are? One of the things that really drew me to this church was because they tithe. The church tithes. So whatever they bring in donations, they tithe 10%. And what they tithe to changes. And like a lot of churches, their biggest thing that their biggest giving day is their Christmas services. And the church we currently attend gives 100% of everything that comes in for donation to their Christmas services. They give it all away.
And that's amazing. And that's actually amazing to me that the church tithes. Like, I think that's been one of my biggest questions in, like, do pastors tithe? Do churches tithe? Like, if we're all called, to tithe, I mean, we could go around and around on this topic, but it just let that sit. I'm going to let my brain like rabbit trail down that for a while, because I think that's actually awesome. And even like the Christmas service, the fact that they give away what they bring in at that donation, because there's so many churches that their Christmas Eve service is their annual budget. And for this church to say, this isn't our annual budget. This is people coming who may only come to church one time. And if they give us money, we want to make sure that, and we tell them where it's going ahead of time. That's just, I think that's awesome. It warms my heart. And actually, I'll say this, the church that you go to, there's things that you've shared with me in situations that have happened throughout the church and the way that the church has held it. And they are part of a larger church plant network that runs things this way.
There's accountability. There's oversight. Yeah,
and I'm going to tell you right now, I might have been completely 100% done with this whole concept of church if it wasn't for the glimmering hope that there are churches out there that may actually possibly be doing things as best as they possibly can without being toxic and hurting people. And I don't even go to that church. You do. So there you go. But at least it gives me the hope that there are churches out there not hurting people and not being toxic and not being cults, because as we're uncovering, it'd be so easy to go down that path. And it seems like the way that we do church is the way. But I think we're going to open up a lot more of this can of worms as we dive down these different areas in our timeline, because I mean, I'm at the point now where I really do sit on that fence of like, believe that there's a purpose in church. But I also am like, we've messed it up so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things like, do you really blame people for walking away completely? No.
Not at all.
No. Just because where I am at personally, I am able to attend a church. I don't go regularly. I'm not there every time the doors open. To be quite honest with you, I probably attend church once.
Do you feel like you have a healthy relationship with your church and the position it should have in your life?
I do. I have never once felt pressured to, where have you been? Why haven't you been there? I've had people reach out and be like, I miss seeing you, and not even bring up the fact that they have not seen me at church, just wanting to catch up on what we're doing.
Yeah. And I feel the same. Like, I feel like where I'm at in my relationship with church organization, I feel is healthy. I feel like it's very beneficial.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I'm what some might call in a completely different paradigm than where I was when I was all in being the Christian I was supposed to be at the church I was supposed to be at. And that was unhealthy. And beyond, like, that was so unhealthy.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
And I'm so healthy now. Like,
well, and I have no judgment, and I do not blame someone for walking through stuff. I mean, our story, I'm sure there's people listening and be like, oh, dude, you have no idea what toxic is because of the crap that I've had to deal with. Like, I acknowledge that. And I acknowledge that, you know, there's some people who will never, ever walk, you know, step foot back into a building ever again because of what had happened to them. And that's valid. And there is no judgment. I heard a quote, and it just spoke so deeply, and I think it goes along with what we've talked about today. It was a quote from a person of color that was talking about during the time of like where they were trying to push for like the abolishment of slavery and fair treatment and all of that kind of stuff. This guy said, you know, there seems to be a lot of people who say that they're helping the Black community behind the scenes, and they're doing a lot of things, and they're helping and they're giving to the Black community behind the scenes. I got to tell you, it must be getting really crowded behind the scenes. And it's because no one is standing up and saying, I'm ready to take on this problem and I want to address it right now. And I don't care who hears me because it is a problem and it needs fixed and it needs taken care of. Instead, oh yeah, I support this cause, but you're not willing to take a stand for it. And I feel like that's what we're trying to do through this podcast is acknowledge that there are messed up things in church culture. And I mean, we could do, I think, an entire podcast just on giving in the church, because we barely scratched the surface in this episode.
And there's nothing wrong
but we're willing
to talking about the there's nothing, what do you call it? You have like the things that shouldn't be said, like where you talk about like, how did you put that? You had something, you put it some way.
Oh, say the quiet things out loud. No?
Yeah. So like, you know, like you say it all the time, say the quiet things out loud. There's nothing wrong with saying the quiet things out loud, you know, and churches preach that message, because but they just don't do it. They preach it.
Well, do it. And when you say the quiet things out loud, it tends to reveal why you're saying it quietly in the first place.
Yep.